In a previous video we showed how you can use the new calendar control on a dialog to put a embedded calendar directly on the dialog. So you can see here I've actually gone ahead and put two calendar controls on, D-start and D-end, and they're both calendar controls. You can see there they're both calendar controls. When I go into working preview, you can see I have two side-by-side calendars, and in this particular case we're going to demonstrate how, for example, you might build a travel site, for example, where you're prompting for the start date of a trip and the end date of a trip. So if I go now to the calendar and I make a selection and I, for example, choose, say, April the 4th as the departure date of my trip, then obviously I can't return on any date before April the 4th. So watch what happens now when I click on April the 4th, how the load date of this calendar is going to get automatically set to April the 4th. So I click there on April the 4th, and you can see now that through automation we executed a method of this calendar control to set the current date to the same date as our departure date, and also to set the disabled date, the low date of this calendar, to April the 4th. So now if I were to, for example, go and change, say, my return date to, say, the 12th, and change my departure date to the 6th, then nothing's going to happen when I click on the 6th over here, other than the load date will be set. So you can see the load date got set. Now the load date gets set, so every time I click on a date here, we update the load date over here so that you can't return before you depart. Now when I move and I click on a departure date that is after April the 12th, say for example the 25th of April, then we need to also change the return date. So the return date now gets set. So when I clicked on a date that is after the currently selected return date, we do two things. We update the low value and also set the selected value in the return date calendar. So there's a fair amount of logic going on here when I do that. So now let's go back to the builder and look at the JavaScript. So let's go back now to the JavaScript, and the first thing that I'm going to point out is that each of these calendars here have certain events that they expose. So if I go there to has events, I can see that when I select a value in the start date calendar, we're going to call a JavaScript function called set load date for dEnd. So that's for the date end. So now I'm going to go over to the JavaScript, and let's look at the function that sets the load date for the date end. So the first thing that you can see that we're doing is we're calling a method of the dialog object called getValue to get the current value of this that's in the start date calendar. So that's the calendar on the left hand side. And then we're calling another method called getControl, and we're actually going to get a pointer to the calendar control for the date end calendar. So this is this calendar over here. So now we have D2 is a pointer to that calendar object. So next what we're going to do is we're going to get the value in the date end calendar by just doing the standard getValue method, reading the date end field, and then next we're going to read the value of the date format that is stored in the dialog object. So the date format, which tells us what format is being used for all date values, is set in this property over there, the date format field, and that gets put into the dialog's state object so that all callbacks can read that value. So I'm just going here and reading the value from the stored date format. Next, what I'm going to do over here is create a new date object by calling the built-in JavaScript date function. But let's pause now and pick this up in the next video.